They sold him for just $1, because no one wanted to claim a horse that shouldn't even exist. Under harsh auction lights, the thin, trembling animal stands like evidence of something wrong. A suited official points and warns, "Ma'am, that horse isn't on any record." The crowd shifts. Then the horse flinches at a single name from the loudspeaker, and Elena realizes this isn't just a rescue. It's a cover-up. At night, the fairgrounds stopped pretending to be noble. In daylight, people called it tradition, heritage, a place where bloodlines were praised and ribbons made everything look respectable. But under the hard, white arena lights, with dust hanging in the air and metal rails throwing long shadows across the dirt, it looked like what it really was when no one bothered to hide it. A place where value was decided in public, and stripped away even faster. The gate opened with a rusty groan. The horse that stepped into the ring did not look like he belonged in any show arena. He looked like something dragged through too many bad hands and too many bad decisions. His ribs showed. His hips were sharp. Dried sweat streaked his dark coat. His legs trembled as though every step had to be negotiated with pain first. And yet his eyes were alive. And that was the part that unsettled people. His body looked finished. His eyes did not. From the second row, Elena Marlowe gripped the wooden rail so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She had not come here to care. She had repeated that lie to herself all the way from her farm. Just look. Just leave. Do not get involved. But the moment she saw him under those lights, she knew that promise was already dead. A few men in the bleachers laughed under their breath. "Looks like he already lost. Half dead still eats." The jokes came easy. They always did when the suffering belonged to something powerless. Elena didn't laugh. She kept watching the horse. He held his head low, but not like he had given up. His ears moved constantly, quick and precise, catching every sound in the arena. He was afraid, yes, but underneath the fear was something else. Awareness. He was still reading the room, and still trying to understand what kind of humans had surrounded him this time. That alone told Elena more than the crowd could. At the far side of the ring, a man in a pressed jacket stepped forward holding a clipboard. Everything about him looked wrong for a barn. Clean boots, crisp collar, no dust on him anywhere. He did not look at the horse the way horse people looked at horses. He looked at him like a problem. The microphone crackled. The man adjusted it with mild annoyance, then spoke in a voice polished enough to sound official before it sounded cruel. "This animal is not eligible for transfer through standard registry channels." The words drifted over the crowd like cold fog. Clean language, bureaucratic language, the kind designed to make something ugly sound procedural. People shifted in their seats. "Registry," someone whispered. "What's wrong with it?" someone else muttered. The man with the clipboard gave the horse only a brief glance, like even looking too long might grant him more dignity than he intended. Then his gaze landed on Elena. Maybe because she was still standing there. Maybe because she was the only one not pretending this was normal. Maybe because power always notices the person in the room who has not fully surrendered to it. He spoke directly to her. "Ma'am, that animal shouldn't even exist on paper." The line hit the ring harder than shouting would have. Conversation stopped. Even the laughter died. Elena felt something old tighten inside her chest. She knew that tone. Not concern, not law, control. It was the same tone her father used to hear from men who smiled while they threatened him. Men who hid behind rules when what they really wanted was obedience. The horse shifted, and Elena caught the movement instantly. A tremor ran through his front leg. A scar showed along one shoulder, another sat lower near the knee. Not random, not accidental. The marks left by a life where pain had stopped being an exception and become part of the routine. The man continued, calm as ever. "This matter falls under association review. The animal will be placed in immediate custody pending disposition." Pending disposition, as if he were broken equipment. as if the horse breathing in front of them, thin, shaking, but still alert, were nothing more than a clerical issue waiting to be removed. The crowd responded the way crowds so often do when something wrong is made official. They murmured. They avoided looking too closely. They waited for permission to stop feeling uncomfortable. Then Elena saw it. The horse flinched at the word custody. Not at the microphone, not at the crowd. At that word. A hard blink, a pull backward through the neck, a subtle shift of weight as though he knew exactly what sounds like that were followed by. That was no ordinary reaction. That was recognition. He had heard voices like this before, calm voices, paper voices, voices that turned living things into cases. The association man nodded toward a handler near the gate. "Take him." The handler hesitated, only for a moment. But long enough for Elena to notice, long enough to see that even he knew something about this felt wrong. Then, duty won. He stepped forward with the lead rope. The horse did not rear. He did not lunge. He did not explode into chaos the way the crowd almost seemed to want him to. He only lifted his head slightly and turned one eye toward Elena. Just one, but it held a question so raw it seemed to cut through the whole arena. "Are you the same as the rest of them?" Elena stopped breathing for a second. Around her, the fairgrounds felt suddenly smaller. The lights hummed overhead. Dust floated through the beams. Somewhere behind her, a child asked what was wrong with the horse. A mother whispered back, "Don't stare." Too late. Elena was staring, not just at the horse, at the machinery closing around him, at the polished man with the clipboard, at the urgency in his voice, at the way everyone kept speaking as if the problem was the animal's existence, not whatever had been done to him. And all at once, the truth rearranged itself in her mind. This was not rescue. No one here had come to help him. This was not paperwork. No one pushed this hard over a starving horse unless that horse meant more than they wanted the public to know. And this was not mercy. This was a cover-up, a public one. The realization landed in Elena like iron. Her father used to say there were two kinds of fear in powerful people: fear of being harmed and fear of being exposed. The second kind always dressed better. The handler moved closer. The association man stepped back with the confidence of someone who expected the room to obey. The crowd leaned in, hungry for spectacle, relieved it was happening to something that could not speak for itself. Elena's fingers dug deeper into the rail. She had spent years surviving by staying small. And keep your head down. Fix what you can. Do not invite trouble. Do not attach your heart to anything this world can take away. That rule had kept her alive. But standing there, watching a ruined horse be erased in front of witnesses, Elena felt that rule begin to break. Because the most dangerous thing in the ring was not the animal. It was the lie being told about him. The handler reached for the rope. The horse froze. The crowd held its breath, and for the first time in years, Elena stopped thinking about what getting involved might cost her. She started thinking about what silence would cost him. Morning came cold to Elena Marlowe's farm. Not dramatic cold. Not the kind that made headlines or closed highways. Just the ordinary grinding kind that slipped through window frames, settled into old boards, and reminded a person exactly how much money they did not have. Before sunrise, the property was all shadows and outlines. A leaning fence, a rusted gate, a barn that still stood mostly because giving up would have cost more than patching it one more season. The yard held the tired silence of a place that had been surviving for years without ever quite getting ahead. Elena stepped out onto the porch with a feed bucket in one hand and yesterday's fatigue still sitting behind her eyes. She moved the way people move when no one is coming to help. No hesitation, no wasted motion. No expectation that anything would get easier just because she was tired. The porch steps creaked under her boots. The dawn air bit through her flannel. Somewhere beyond the tree line, A dog barked once and then stopped, as if even that small burst of noise wasn't worth the energy. She crossed the yard, past a coil of wire waiting to mend a fence section she still hadn't reached, and shouldered open the barn door. Inside, the air smelled like hay, dust, old leather, and the faint mineral chill of metal that had spent the night cooling in darkness. This was the part of life Elena understood. Not people, not promises, not institutions dressed up as authority. Work. Work made sense. Animals needed feed whether your heart was tired or not. Fences broke whether grief had finished with you or not. Winter came whether you had enough money for it or not. Labor, at least, was honest. She set down the bucket, filled the trough, checked the stall latch. He ran practiced eyes over everything that might fail next. Her days were built from small preventions. Tighten this hinge. Save that bale. Stretch one bag of grain farther than it should go. If she kept enough things from collapsing at once, maybe the whole place would hold another month. Maybe that was all survival really was. A long series of postponements. When she went back inside, the kitchen greeted her with the usual evidence of a life lived carefully close to the edge. A stack of envelopes sat near the coffee tin. Bills, mostly. Feed supply. Electric. A notice she had not opened because the red lettering on the front had already said enough. Beside them sat a mug with a hairline crack and a spoon still resting in it from the night before. And near the corner of the table, half turned away as though even memory had learned not to take up too much room, stood the photograph. Elena paused. She always paused. The frame had been cracked for years, the glass splitting one corner of the image with a pale diagonal scar. And her father stood in the center, one hand resting on the neck of a horse with a dark coat and a white heart-shaped marking on its forehead. He was smiling in the photograph, though in Elena's memory he more often wore the look of a man who had seen too much of how power worked and refused to bow to it anyway. She hated that smile some mornings. Not because it was false, because it was real. It belonged to a version of the world where decency still seemed like enough. Elena lifted the frame and thumbed dust from the edge. Her younger self stood just off to one side in the picture, all elbows and hope, leaning into her father like the future was still something you could trust. That girl was gone. Life had taken care of that. Her father had spent years arguing with people who called themselves protectors of the industry. Men who loved paperwork more than animals. Men who could ruin a reputation with a meeting, a signature, a rumor carried far enough by the right mouths. Yes, he had challenged them once too often. After that, everything got harder. Fewer buyers, fewer allies, more whispers, more bills. And when he died, he did not leave Elena a clean inheritance. He left her land that barely paid for itself, tools with one season left in them, and a lesson she had never been able to forget. Do not love anything this world can punish you for protecting. It was not something he had said aloud. Her father would never have taught that with words, but life had. Elena set the frame back down. On the refrigerator, held in place by a weak magnet, hung a handwritten list of what still needed money this month. Feed, repairs, vet account, truck brakes. She looked at it for 3 seconds, then looked away. Some numbers became crueler the longer you gave them attention. She poured herself coffee, thin and bitter. Then she stood at the sink and watched dawn spread pale light over the back field. It would have been easy, from the outside, to call her strong. People always mistook endurance for strength, but endurance was not noble, not most days. Most days it was just a woman in work boots teaching herself not to want too much, not to expect rescue, not to expect fairness, and, above all, not to get attached. Attachment was dangerous. Attachment made you foolish. Attachment made you stand in doorways long after the world had already shown you it was perfectly willing to break what you loved and send you the bill afterward. That was why Elena kept her life small. Small was manageable. Small did not invite attention. Small did not reopen old wounds. Later that morning, she drove into town for feed and came back with less than she needed and more worry than she had left with. The feed store smelled like grain and diesel and old conversation. Men leaned against the counter trading weather opinions like they were facts. Somebody complained about hay prices. Somebody else laughed about a colt that had kicked through a trailer wall. Elena kept to herself. She paid, loaded the truck, and was nearly back out the door when she heard it. "Got a reject horse coming through tonight." The voice came from behind the register. Another man answered. "Bad enough to put down?" The first one snorted. "Worse, they're selling it for $1. No guarantees." $1. The words hit Elena strangely. Cheap enough to be a joke. Cheap enough to be a warning. Cheap enough to mean the animal had already been sentenced in everybody's mind before it ever entered the ring. She should have kept walking. That would have been the sensible thing. The disciplined thing. The version of herself she had spent years constructing would have understood exactly how to respond. Keep moving. Do not ask questions. Whatever is wrong with that horse is bigger than you can afford. But instead, Elena slowed. "Where?" she heard herself ask. The man at the register glanced up. "County Fairgrounds. Evening lot. The association people are involved, I think." Association? That one word brought a cold, familiar pressure into her chest. She said nothing after that. Just nodded once, as if the information meant very little, then carried the feed out to the truck. On the drive home, the road stretched long and flat ahead of her, bordered by winter-browned fields and fence posts that seemed to repeat forever. She kept both hands on the wheel. A reject horse, $1, association involved, every piece of it said stay away. She knew how these stories went. There was always some hidden cost, some buried trouble, some detail that turned pity into liability before you had time to understand what you had agreed to. Poor people did not get to make sentimental decisions. Poor people paid interest on compassion. By the time she pulled into the yard, she had almost talked herself out of it. Almost. She unloaded the feed, checked the water trough, refastened a loose latch, tried to let the rhythm of chores settle the question. It didn't, because beneath the practical thoughts, something older had stirred. A memory, not clear, just a feeling. Her father kneeling in straw, showing her how to approach a frightened animal without crowding it. "You don't start with force," he had said once, his voice low, patient, sure. "You start by giving them a reason not to fear the next second." Elena closed the barn door harder than she meant to. By late afternoon, the sky had gone the color of worn tin. Wind moved through the pasture grass in thin, restless waves. Inside the house, the silence returned to its usual place across the rooms. She stood by the kitchen chair and looked at the wall hook by the back door. Her halter hung there. Old leather, softened by use. Oiled so many times the cracks no longer spread. She stared at it for a long moment. This was the dangerous part, not the drive, not the auction, not even the possibility of trouble. This, and the second before a person admits the truth to themselves. She was going. Not because she believed she could save anything, not because she was hopeful. Certainly not because she had money to waste on problems. She was going because somewhere inside her, beneath all the scar tissue and caution and hard-earned self-control, there was still a line she could not bear to watch people cross without witness. "Just to look," she said aloud to the empty kitchen. The room, wisely, did not answer. Elena took the halter from the hook, and even before she reached the door, she knew the lie for what it was. By the time Elena reached the county fairgrounds, the light was already draining out of the sky. The place looked tired before it looked busy. Rust along the railings. Mud worked into the gravel. A row of stock trailers lined up under weak floodlights, as if disappointment had learned to park in neat formation. From somewhere behind the auction barn came the sharp clang of metal gates and the restless thud of hooves against wood. The evening crowd had arrived in layers. Ranchers in worn jackets. locals with coffee cups, men who came for bargains and men who came for spectacle, and the small, ugly thrill of watching something weaker than themselves go cheap. Their voices rolled together in rough laughter, fragments of gossip, the practiced indifference of people who had seen too much and felt too little about it. La Yelena parked at the edge of the lot and killed the engine. For a moment, she stayed still with both hands on the wheel. This was the last clean second. The last second before she could pretend she had only been curious. Then a horse screamed somewhere inside the barn. Not wild, not dramatic, just the sound of fear hitting metal. Elena got out. Inside, the auction barn was all hard light and colder air. Bleachers rose along one wall, half filled already. The concrete beneath her boots was stained by years of mud, manure, spilled coffee, old panic. The place smelled like dust, sweat, damp hay, and the sour trace of animals that had learned too late what human convenience could look like. She moved along the back aisle until she found the listing board. Most lots had numbers and short descriptions written in marker. Gelding, broodmare, grade colt. Sound enough, needs work. Somebody had added jokes beside two of the names. Near the bottom, she found it. No breed listed, no history. No seller details anyone cared to display. Just one blunt line. $1. No guarantees. Final sale. Elena stared at the board a second too long. There it was. The sentence before the sentence. The public version of throwing something away. A man beside her snorted when he noticed what she was looking at. "That one's a waste of a trailer ride," he said. Elena did not answer. He kept going anyway, like men often do when they mistake a woman's silence for invitation. "Association people are already sniffing around it. Means trouble. Nobody wants trouble for a horse that looks one hard winter away from the dirt." He walked off before she could respond, leaving the words behind him like trash. Trouble. That word again. Elena stepped away from the board and followed the noise toward the holding pens. The horse was in the third stall down. At first glance, he looked even worse than he had under the arena lights. Up close, there was no distance left to soften anything. He was too lean across the ribs, and too hollow through the flank. His coat, dark beneath the grime, should have had some depth to it. Instead, it looked dulled by neglect and handled by too many indifferent hands. There was dried sweat caked along his neck. One hind leg rested too carefully, as if he had long ago learned to hide pain by distributing it. But none of that hit Elena the hardest. It was the way he stood. Not collapsed, not surrendered, held together. Barely, maybe, but deliberately. Like some private part of him had refused to sign the same agreement his body had been forced into. He heard her boots and turned his head. The movement was small, slow, controlled. His face was finer than she expected. His eyes, dark and watchful, locked onto her with the same impossible alertness she had seen from the bleachers. Not vacant, not broken, and not, despite everything people were saying, empty. He was still in there. And the noise around them seemed to fall away for a second. Then someone behind Elena laughed. "Go on," another voice said. "Maybe he'll bite you for free." A couple men nearby grinned without much humor. One of them leaned on the rail, chewing on a toothpick like he had come here for exactly this kind of entertainment. Elena ignored them. She stepped closer, stopping far enough back not to corner him. Her father had taught her that much when she was a girl. Fear notices pressure faster than kindness. The horse's ears flicked. He did not pin them. He did not lunge. He just watched. Then Elena saw it. Right beneath the mane, near the base of the neck, a patch of hair had been shaved away. Freshly, too clean to be an accident, too deliberate to be neglect. Her pulse changed. That was not the mark of somebody giving up on a horse. That was somebody hiding something. She kept her face still, though her thoughts had already started moving faster. A brand removed? An identifying mark covered? A scar someone did not want recorded? Whatever it was, it mattered enough for someone to take clippers to a starving animal before letting him be seen. The auction bell rang once. Time. A handler swung open the pen and snapped a lead onto the horse with practiced impatience. The horse tensed, not violently, but in a way Elena felt in her own spine, the kind of tension that came from memory, not surprise. He had been jerked before, pushed before, punished for hesitating before. "Lots up," the handler muttered. They led him toward the ring. He did not fight. That was the worst part. He walked like something already condemned had decided resistance only made the rope hurt more. When they brought him into the arena, the crowd reacted exactly as crowds always did when suffering was made public and cheap. A few laughed. A few shook their heads. A few looked away quickly so they would not be burdened by conscience. The auctioneer barely tried to dress it up. $1, folks," he called. $1 and he's yours. No guarantees, no claims, final sale. Anybody?" Silence. The horse stood under the lights, ribs showing, head low, every flaw made brighter by the glare, and yet his eyes kept moving, measuring faces, reading danger, searching for one reason not to believe the whole room had already decided his worth. $1. Nobody raised a hand, not because they could not afford him, because they did not want what came with him. A thin horse was one thing, a troubled horse was another, but a horse that made association men appear? A horse with something shaved off his neck and fear trained too precisely into his muscles? That was not an animal to them. That was liability. The auctioneer sighed into the microphone. "Anybody at all?" Elena felt the old war begin inside her. Reason on one side, recognition on the other. You do not have the money. You do not have the room for trouble. You do not bring a storm onto land already barely holding. But beneath all of that came something quieter. If you walk away now, you will remember his face. Her hand moved before the rest of her had fully agreed. "I'll take him." The words cut through the ring. A few heads turned. Someone barked a laugh. The auctioneer leaned forward as if he had misheard. "For $1." Elena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the bill she had folded there earlier. It was worn soft at the edges. Nothing symbolic when she left home. Just money. Just one more tired thing surviving in a hard world. Now it felt like a witness. She stepped forward and held it out. "For $1, she said. The clerk looked irritated, almost disappointed that the scene had ended without total humiliation. He took the bill and scribbled something on the sale sheet. "What are you planning to do with him?" he asked, not because he cared, but because suspicion liked paperwork. Elena met his eyes evenly. "He's just for pasture," she said. "A companion. A half-truth. A shield," because she did not yet know what she believed about the horse standing there under the lights. Only that saying too much in a place like this was how decent intentions got hunted. The clerk grunted. "Then he's your problem now." Yes, Elena thought. That was exactly what worried them. The handler passed her the lead rope. For a second, the horse did not move. Then Elena shifted her weight slightly, leaving him space instead of pulling. His ears tipped toward her. He took one careful step, then another. Not obedience. Decision. As she led him toward the exit, the crowd's attention began to slide away. The show was over. The joke had landed. The dollar horse had been claimed by a woman too tired-looking to be reckless and too quiet-looking to be important. But not everyone looked away. Out in the parking lot, under the weak wash of the floodlights, a black truck sat idling at the edge of the gravel. Lights off, engine low. Still as a thought waiting to become a threat. Elena felt the horse hesitate beside her. She followed his gaze. The truck did not move. It just watched them load out. Elena did not take the highway home. She told herself it was habit. Old roads. Fewer headlights. Less chance of running into someone who asked questions she didn't want to answer. But the truth sat deeper than that. Quieter. Sharper. Something about the night felt watched. The trailer creaked behind her as Orion shifted his weight. Not panic, not yet. Just the careful adjustment of an animal that had learned to prepare for impact before it came. Every bump in the road made him brace. Every turn made him tighten. Elena kept her hands steady on the wheel. "It's okay," she said once, low enough that it was more rhythm than reassurance. She didn't know if he understood the words, but tone mattered. It always had. By the time she pulled into her yard, the sky had dropped into full darkness. The porch light cast a small circle onto the dirt. Not enough to make anything safe, just enough to pretend. She stepped out first. No sudden movements, no rushing. The barn door opened with its usual complaint. Inside, the air held a quiet that felt earned, not forced, the kind of quiet that came from routine instead of fear. Elena lowered the trailer gate. Orion didn't bolt. He stepped down slowly, one leg at a time, testing the ground as if expecting it to disappear beneath him. When all four hooves settled onto the dirt, he stood still for a long moment, head low, listening. Not to the barn, to everything beyond it. Elena gave him space. "Easy," she said softly. She led him inside without pulling. He followed, not out of trust, but because she had not yet given him a reason not to. Inside the stall, she set down a bucket of water. Orion stepped toward it, then stopped. His front leg trembled. He lowered his head, lips touching the surface, and then flinched, like even the act of drinking had once come with consequences. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. "It's just water," she murmured. She steadied the bucket with both hands. Slowly, carefully, Orion tried again. This time, he drank. But his legs shook so badly the water rippled with each swallow. Not hunger alone, exhaustion. Deep enough to live in the muscles. Elena stayed there, holding the bucket until he could take a few steady mouthfuls without fear. She did not reach for him, did not rush the moment. She understood instinctively that this was not the time for ownership. This was the time for permission. Outside, tires crunched softly over gravel. Elena froze. The sound didn't belong. Not out here, not at this hour. Headlights swept across the barn wall in a slow arc, cutting through the wooden slats like a blade. The same black truck. It rolled past the end of her driveway. Not stopping, not leaving, just slow enough to be deliberate. Elena's pulse sharpened. Inside the stall, Orion lifted his head. Not startled, alert. He turned one ear toward the road, body tightening in a way that told her this was not new to him. He knew what that sound meant. The truck disappeared into the darkness, but the feeling did not leave. A moment later, Elena's phone buzzed in her back pocket. One vibration. She pulled it out. Unknown number. No greeting, no explanation. Just 5 words. "You bought the wrong horse." Elena stared at the screen. For a second, the barn felt smaller, the walls closer, the air thinner. Then Orion shifted again behind her, hooves scraping lightly against the stall floor. A reminder. This wasn't fear. This was information. Someone had followed her. Someone had taken the time to send that message, and someone believed she would understand what it meant. Elena slipped the phone back into her pocket. She didn't reply, didn't call, didn't give them anything. Instead, she closed the stall gate and checked the latch twice. Routine, control. The small things that made chaos hesitate. An hour later, just as she stepped back onto the porch, headlights appeared again. Different this time. Warmer. Closer. A truck she recognized. Arthur Klein climbed out slowly, hat already in his hands. Arthur didn't visit without reason. He was the kind of neighbor who understood distance. The kind who fixed his own fences and expected you to fix yours. The kind who respected silence as much as speech. So, when he crossed the yard toward her, Elena knew something had shifted. "I hope I'm not too late," he said. "You're not early either," Elena replied. Arthur gave a small nod, accepting that. "I found something," he said. "Cleaning out the old shed. Thought it was mine. Wasn't." He handed her an envelope. Old paper, yellowed edges, the kind that had waited a long time to be opened. Elena's fingers hesitated just long enough to matter. Then she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet, a drawing, simple, careful, familiar, a horse's head, and at the center of its forehead, a white, heart-shaped marking. Elena's breath caught. Her father's handwriting ran beneath it. "If they ever find him, they'll destroy what he proves." The world seemed to narrow around that sentence. Not because it was confusing, because it wasn't, because it made everything else sharper. The auction, the shaved patch, the black truck, the message. Proof. Orion wasn't just unwanted, he was dangerous. Arthur shifted his weight. "There was something else," he said quietly. Elena reached back into the envelope. Another slip of paper. Different handwriting. No name, no signature. Just a sentence written in careful, deliberate strokes. "If you want the truth, don't trust daylight. I'll come when it's safe." Elena stared at it longer than she meant to. "Who left this?" she asked. Arthur shook his head. "No idea. Been sitting there longer than I realized." The wind moved through the yard, lifting dust in thin spirals. Elena folded both papers carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. And her mind had already moved ahead, connecting pieces. Not all of them, not yet, but enough. Enough to understand one thing clearly. This was not over. Not by a long shot. Arthur glanced toward the barn. "That horse," he said, then stopped. Elena followed his gaze. Inside, Orion stood in the dim stall light, head lowered again, body still tense in ways that spoke of long memory. "He's not the problem," Elena said quietly. Arthur studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Didn't think he was." They stood there in the dark, the space between them filled with everything neither of them said out loud. Finally, Arthur tipped his hat. "You be careful," he said. Elena didn't answer, because careful wasn't going to be enough anymore. After he left, she went back inside, set the envelope on the table, and pulled out her phone. Photos first, scars, close-up, angles, lighting, then video. The tremble in Orion's legs, the hesitation at the water, the shaved patch beneath the mane, time stamps. Notes, everything documented, everything real, because if someone was willing to follow her home over a $1 horse, then that horse was worth more than anyone had been willing to admit. And the moment she saved the file, something shifted. Not in the barn, not in the house, but somewhere beyond it, as if a quiet signal had just been sent and answered. Elena stood still for a moment, listening to the silence. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the beginning of something. And beginnings, she knew from experience, were rarely gentle. They came in daylight. Not at night, not hidden, not uncertain. Daylight made everything look legitimate. Elena saw the vehicle before it reached the gate. White, clean, official in the way that tried too hard not to look like power while carrying all of it. The kind of vehicle that didn't ask permission to enter a place it assumed it already had it. Dust lifted behind the tires as it rolled slowly up her drive. Elena was in the barn when she heard it. She didn't rush out. Rushing meant fear. Fear gave people like that leverage. Instead, she finished what she was doing, checking Orion's water, adjusting the feed, keeping her movement steady, controlled. Orion stood close behind her, quieter than the night before, but not relaxed. Not yet. His ears flicked toward the sound outside. His body had already recognized something before she confirmed it. "Easy," she murmured. Then she stepped out into the morning. The air was sharp, the kind that carried sound clearly. The vehicle door opened with a clean, practiced motion. Two people stepped out. A woman in a pressed jacket, a man with a clipboard. They did not look around the farm with curiosity. They scanned it, measured it, filed it away. Elena stopped a few feet from the porch. That was far enough. "This is private property," she said. The woman smiled. Not warmly, not politely, efficiently. "We're aware," she replied. "We're here regarding an animal currently in your possession." Elena didn't answer immediately. She let the silence sit between them. The man with the clipboard shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the lack of immediate compliance. The woman wasn't. She had done this before, enough times to know that most people stepped aside before she had to ask twice. Elena didn't step aside. "You bought the horse at last night's auction," the woman continued. "That transaction has been flagged." Flagged, another clean word, another way of saying watched. "I have a receipt," Elena said. The man lifted the clipboard slightly. "This isn't about the sale," he said. "It's about compliance." Behind Elena, Orion shifted in the stall. The sound was soft, but it was enough. The woman's eyes flicked toward the barn door. There it was. Interest. Not in the property. Not in Elena. In him. And suddenly, everything sharpened. If this were just paperwork, they wouldn't be here this fast. If this were just a sick horse, they wouldn't care at all. Elena felt the pieces lock into place. This was not about rules. This was about control. "What kind of compliance?" Elena asked. The woman stepped forward just enough to place a folded document on the porch rail. The paper made a small final sound as it landed. "Immediate surrender," she said. "The animal will be transferred for humane disposal." Humane. Elena almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the word had been twisted so far it barely resembled itself anymore. She didn't pick up the paper right away. Instead, she looked at the woman. Really looked. Clean boots, no dust, no hesitation. The posture of someone who had never had to choose between feeding an animal and paying a bill. "You came here fast," Elena said. The woman didn't deny it. "We act quickly when necessary." Necessary. Another word dressed up to sound reasonable. Elena picked up the document. Her eyes moved over the printed lines. Official seals. Language that removed responsibility while sounding precise. Terms like non-compliant bloodline and registry conflict. Phrases designed to make destruction look like maintenance, but one line mattered more than the rest. Subject animal presents a liability to registry integrity. There it was, not sick, not dangerous, a liability. Elena lowered the paper slowly. "You're not here because he's weak," she said. And the woman's expression didn't change. "No," she replied, "we're here because he shouldn't exist within our system." Elena's chest tightened. Not exist. Same words. Same tone. From the arena to her own porch. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a pattern. "He was sold legally," Elena said. The man with the clipboard exhaled softly, like he had heard that argument too many times to respect it. "Legality doesn't override classification," he said. Elena felt something cold settle under her ribs. Classification, a label, a decision made somewhere else that turned a living thing into a problem. Behind her, Orion stamped once. Not loud, not aggressive, just a small, contained release of tension. The woman's gaze shifted again, tracking him, calculating, and in that moment, Elena saw it clearly. This wasn't about a horse, this was about something bigger. If Orion were worthless, they would ignore him. If Orion were nothing, they would let him disappear quietly. But they were here, in person, pressing. Because Orion was not a mistake. He was evidence. Evidence of something their system could not afford to admit. The woman extended a pen. "You can sign now," she said. "We can make this easy." Easy. For who? Elena looked at the pen, then at the paper, then back at the woman. Around them, the farm stayed quiet. No neighbors pulling in, no one stepping forward, just wind moving through dry grass and the faint creak of a fence line that had seen better years. This was how pressure worked. Quiet, personal, contained. So no one else had to choose a side. "You're asking me to give him to you," Elena said. "We're asking you to comply," the woman corrected. "No," Elena said softly. "You're asking me to disappear him." The man with the clipboard shifted again. The woman's smile thinned. "You're making assumptions," she said. "No," Elena replied. "I'm paying attention." For a second, nothing moved. Then the woman's voice lost its softness. "Hey, sign the paper." It wasn't a request anymore. Elena looked down at the document one last time. Then she tore it. Slowly, cleanly, right down the middle. The sound of paper splitting carried farther than it should have. The man inhaled sharply. The woman didn't. But something in her posture changed. Not surprise, recalculation. The two halves of the document fluttered to the porch floor. Elena let them fall. "You don't get to decide who deserves to live," she said. The words came out steady, not loud, but final. Behind her, Orion stood still, listening. The woman took a small step back. Not retreat, distance. The kind people put between themselves and a problem that just became more complicated. "You're making this difficult," she said. Elena held her ground. "No," she replied. "You are." The wind shifted. Dust lifted. Somewhere down the road a vehicle passed, unaware that anything here had just changed. The man with the clipboard closed it with a quiet snap. But the woman looked at Elena for one long second. Memorizing. Measuring. Then she spoke. "Then we'll do it the hard way." No raised voice, no threat sharpened for drama. Just a statement. The kind that meant whatever came next would not be contained to a porch conversation. They turned and walked back to the vehicle. No hurry, no wasted movement. Like this was only the first step in something already set in motion. The engine started. Gravel shifted under the tires. The white vehicle pulled away. And just before it disappeared past the end of the road, Elena saw it. Further out, parked where it had been the night before. The black truck, still watching. Elena stood on the porch long after the dust settled. Her hands were steady. But something inside her had crossed a line she could not step back over. Behind her, Orion exhaled. A long, slow breath. Not relief, not yet. But something close to recognition. As if he understood, in the only way that mattered, that the pattern had changed. Elena looked down at the torn paper at her feet, then out at the empty road. And somewhere in the quiet, her father's voice returned, not as comfort, but as truth. "If you do this, it changes everything." Elena didn't move, because now she knew it already had. That night, the farm felt different. Not louder, not busier, but awake. Elena moved through the barn with deliberate care, the way people do when they understand something has shifted and can't yet see the full shape of it. Every latch checked twice, every hinge listened to, every shadow measured. Orion stood in the stall under a single hanging light. He looked less like a ghost than he had the night before. Still thin, still worn, but something in the way he held himself had changed, just enough to notice if you knew where to look. He was no longer waiting for the next blow. He was waiting to see what came next. Elena carried in a smaller bucket this time. Not full, not overwhelming. Measured. She set it down and stepped back. No pressure, no expectation. Orion lowered his head slowly, paused, then drank. No shaking. Not completely steady, but steadier. It was a small thing, the kind most people would miss. But Elena didn't, because survival wasn't built on big moments. It was built on quiet ones like this. "You're learning," she said softly. Or maybe she was. She stayed there longer than she meant to, leaning against the stall rail, watching the rhythm return to him one careful second at a time. His breathing slowed. His muscles loosened in small, reluctant releases. Then, for the first time since she had brought him home, Orion rested. Not collapsing, not bracing, resting. His head lowered, his eyes half closed. One hind leg shifted, not to protect pain, but because, for a moment, he believed the ground beneath him would stay where it was. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, something more dangerous. Hope. She turned away before it could settle too deeply. Hope made people careless. In the kitchen, she spread everything out across the table. The receipt from the auction. Photos on her phone scars, angles, the shaved patch beneath Orion's mane, video clips. His trembling legs, the hesitation at water, the way he reacted to certain sounds. Notes, times, details. She arranged them the way her father used to arrange things when he was building an argument, not for emotion, but for proof, because proof was harder to silence. Her phone buzzed once, no number, no message this time, just the quiet reminder that she was no longer operating unnoticed. Elena ignored it. She kept working, because if someone had come to her door in daylight with papers already printed, then whatever this was had been moving long before she stepped into that auction. And if Orion was evidence, then evidence needed to be preserved. Hours passed. The house grew colder. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the siding like fingers testing for weakness. Then, a sound, soft, close. Not the road, the porch. Elena froze. Her eyes moved toward the door. No second knock, no announcement, just presence. She reached for the handle slowly and pulled the door open. A man stood in the shadow just beyond the porch light. Older, weathered, shoulders carrying years that had not been kind. His face was lined in a way that came not just from age, but from decisions that had stayed with him longer than they should have. He didn't step forward. He didn't speak right away. He just raised his hands slightly, empty, as if to show he had not come to take anything. "Elena," he said finally. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his voice. "You're late," she replied. It wasn't a greeting. The man gave a small nod. "I had to be," he said. Elena's eyes didn't leave him. "You wrote the note." It wasn't a question. "No," he said, "but I knew it would reach you." That was worse. "Who are you?" she asked. The man hesitated. And then, Thomas Vane. The name landed quietly, not recognized immediately, but not meaningless either. Somewhere in the back of Elena's memory, it brushed against something her father had once said and never finished. "Why are you here?" she asked. Thomas glanced past her toward the barn. His expression shifted. Regret. That was the word. "I came to see if you'd do it," he said. "Do what?" "Refuse them." Elena felt her jaw tighten. "And if I hadn't?" Thomas met her eyes. "Then I wouldn't be standing here." The honesty in that answer settled heavily between them. "You let this happen," Elena said. It wasn't accusation. It was fact. Thomas didn't defend himself. "I didn't stop it," he said. "That's the same thing." Silence stretched. The wind pressed harder against the house. Elena stepped aside just enough. "Say what you came to say." Thomas moved onto the porch, but not fully inside. Like he understood he hadn't earned that yet. "They're not afraid of that horse because he's weak," he said. "I know," Elena replied. "They're afraid because he proves something." Elena crossed her arms. "Then say it." Thomas exhaled slowly. "The registry," he said. "The bloodlines they sell, they're not what they claim to be." Elena didn't react. Not outwardly. "They manipulate records," Thomas continued. "Swap lineage, reassign parentage, build value where it doesn't exist, and erase it where it does." His eyes flicked toward the barn again. "Your horse, Orion." Elena stilled at the name. Thomas noticed. "You named him," he said quietly. Elena didn't answer. "He's proof," Thomas said. "Proof that their system isn't just flawed, it's controlled. If he's acknowledged, it calls everything else into question." Elena felt something cold settle into place. "My father knew," she said. Thomas nodded. "He found out," he said. "Tried to bring it forward." "And you?" Elena asked. Thomas's voice lowered. I hesitated. One word, and heavy enough to explain years. "They shut him down," Thomas continued. "Not publicly, quietly, took away buyers, turned people against him, made it unlivable." Elena's throat tightened. "And Orion?" Thomas looked toward the barn again. "Your father hid him," he said, "kept him off record, off their system." "Why not destroy him?" Elena asked. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Because your father believed proof mattered," he said, "even if he couldn't use it yet." The room felt smaller. Everything connected now. The auction, the shaved mark, the urgency, the truck. "They're going to come back," Elena said. Thomas nodded once. "Yes." "And you're here now. Why?" Thomas finally stepped fully into the light. "Because I don't want to hesitate again." The words sat between them. Not clean. Not enough. But real. Before Elena could respond, Orion lifted his head sharply inside the barn. Not fear. Awareness. Thomas turned at the same moment. Both of them heard it. Tires. Slow. Deliberate. Elena stepped past him and out onto the porch. At the far edge of the road, headlights. Low. Still. The black truck. It didn't drive past this time. It stopped. The engine idled, waiting. Elena stood there, the cold night pressing in around her, the weight of everything settling into place. This was no longer a warning. This was pressure, and it wasn't going away. Behind her, Orion shifted once. Not backing away, not braking, standing. Elena didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the truck. Because now she understood something clearly. This was no longer about whether she could protect him quietly. It was about whether she was willing to be seen doing it. And once that line was crossed, there was no going back. Elena didn't sleep. By morning, the decision was already made. Not in words, not in some dramatic moment of clarity, in something quieter, something irreversible. She was done letting them control the terms. If they wanted Orion erased quietly, then quiet was the one thing she would no longer give them. The Fall Valley Showcase was 3 days away, the kind of event the association built its reputation on. Clean horses, clean paperwork, clean stories, a place where value was performed as much as it was judged, and, more importantly, a place where everything happened in public. "Elena, that's not just risky," Arthur said, standing in her yard, hat low over his eyes. "That's walking straight into them." "I know," she replied. Thomas stood off to the side, watching her with a different kind of understanding. Not fear, recognition. "Yeah, they won't expect it," Elena said. Arthur let out a dry breath. "No," he said. "They won't." That was the point. For days, they had followed her in the dark, pressured her in private, framed everything in language that sounded official enough to suffocate resistance before it could form. So Elena chose the one place they couldn't hide, the arena, the same kind of place where they had tried to erase Orion in front of witnesses. Now she would bring him back into the light, not as a mistake, as proof. The morning of the showcase came with a thin layer of frost across the ground. Elena moved through the barn with steady hands. No rushing, no wasted motion. Orion stood quietly as she brushed the dust from his coat. He was still thin, still marked by everything that had been done to him, but there was a difference now. His eyes were clearer, his movements more certain. Not healed, but healing. That mattered more. "You ready?" she murmured. Orion flicked an ear toward her. Not submission, attention. That was enough. The fairgrounds looked different in daylight, cleaner, louder, full of people pretending everything here was built on fairness. Trailers lined the lot. Horses stepped down with polished coats and practiced calm. Owners adjusted tack with quiet pride. Judges moved in clusters, their voices measured, their attention selective. And threaded through all of it, the association, watching, organizing, controlling. Elena felt their presence before she saw them. Then the same man from the auction stepped into her path. Pressed jacket, clipboard, the same careful expression. "You still have time," he said quietly. "Turn around. Take the offer. Save yourself the trouble." Elena didn't slow. "Move," she said. For a fraction of a second, something sharper flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, calculation. Then he stepped aside. Because scenes here required witnesses, and witnesses complicated things. The arena filled slowly. Names were called, horses were presented. Applause came and went in polite waves. Then, next entry. A pause, a shift in the crowd. Because the horse entering the ring did not match the pattern. Orion stepped into the light. No polished tack, no expensive handler, no illusion of perfection. Just a plain halter, and a woman who refused to look away. A murmur moved through the stands. "That's the dollar horse. What's she doing bringing that here? Association's not going to like this." Good, let them not like it. Elena walked Orion to the center of the ring, stopped, turned, waited. The association man stepped forward immediately. "This animal is non-compliant," he announced. "It does not meet registry standards and should not." "Elena," Thomas's voice cut in from the rail, not loud, but timed. Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out the file. Photos, documents, notes, proof. "Before you finish that sentence," she said calmly, "you might want to explain this." The crowd leaned in, because now it wasn't just a horse, it was a story, and people always stayed for stories. The association man's jaw tightened. "This is not the place." "No," Elena said, "this is exactly the place." She held up the photos, the shaved patch, the scars, the documentation. "The system you're protecting," she continued, "only works if no one looks too closely." A ripple moved through the judges. One of them, older, quieter, leaned forward. "Let her speak," he said. That changed everything, because now it wasn't just noise, it was testimony. Thomas stepped forward beside the rail. "I worked inside it," he said. "The registry, the bloodlines, the records." The crowd shifted again. "They manipulate lineage," he continued, "reassign parentage, build value where it doesn't exist, and erase it where it does." The association man's composure cracked just slightly. "This is speculation." "It's proof," Thomas said. Elena didn't look at him. She looked at Orion. "Go on," she whispered. "No command, just trust." Orion moved, not wildly, not dramatically, but with control. He stepped forward, then turned, not pulled, not forced his body responding to her position, her presence. A shift of weight, a pause, a small, precise adjustment that showed awareness, not fear. The crowd went quiet, because this was not a broken animal. This was intelligence. This was restraint. This was something trained not by force, but surviving, despite it. Orion lifted his head, not high in panic, steady, present, the kind of presence you couldn't fake. The older judge stood slowly. "In 40 years, he said, voice carrying across the arena, "I have not seen a horse hold himself like that under this kind of pressure." Silence followed. Then, movement. Not from Elena, not from Orion, from the crowd, because something had shifted. The story had changed. The horse was no longer the problem. The system was. The association man stepped back, just half a step, but it was enough, because control, once questioned, never fully returns. Later, there were no speeches, no dramatic declarations, just quiet, the kind that comes after truth has been said out loud and cannot be taken back. Weeks passed. The farm changed slowly. A repaired fence line, a fuller feed bin, a calendar on the wall with vet visits marked in ink instead of hope. Orion's coat began to recover its depth. His movements steadied. His eyes, still watchful, but no longer waiting for the next blow. One morning, Elena stood on the porch with a cup of coffee that didn't taste quite as thin. The air was still cold. The work was still there. The bills had not disappeared. But something had changed. Not in the world, in her. Inside the barn, Orion shifted, then stepped forward into the light of the open door. Not because he was told to, because he chose to. Elena watched him for a long moment, then set her cup down and walked toward him. No rush, no fear, just the steady rhythm of a life that had decided, finally, not to stay small, because hope was not a miracle. It was this: showing up again, and again, and again, even when the world made it clear how much it could cost, and choosing quietly, stubbornly, to do it anyway.